Welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting into the theoretical heart of Five Nights at Freddy's, exploring the 5 fan theories that didn't just spark debate. They fundamentally transformed how we understand this entire franchise. These weren't just interesting ideas that faded into obscurity. These were the theories that rewrote the rulebook, that forced Scott Cawthon himself to respond, that united millions of theorists in collaborative detective work spanning over a decade. From discovering hidden timelines to unmasking secret identities, from debunking massive misconceptions to revealing the vengeful spirits lurking in golden shells. These theories changed everything we thought we knew about possessed animatronics, murdered children, and one purple-suited killer's decades-long reign of terror. For more than 11 years now, our Five Nights at Freddy's has captivated players with something far beyond jump scares and atmospheric dread. While other horror games relied purely on visceral terror, Scott Cawthon built something different. A mystery box wrapped in layers of misdirection, hidden clues, and cryptic minigames. He gave us newspapers with missing information, phone calls that revealed more than they said, and Easter eggs so obscure that finding them required frame-by-frame analysis and hexadecimal code conversions. What emerged wasn't just a game franchise, but a collaborative investigation. A worldwide community of theorists piecing together fragments of a story that Scott deliberately obscured, testing our ability to connect dots he'd scattered across multiple games, books, and hidden messages on his own website. And this community-driven approach to storytelling was revolutionary. Before FNAF, most game lore was either explicitly told through cutscenes and dialogue, or it was minimalist, environmental storytelling where details enhanced but didn't replace the core narrative. Scott created something in between, a complete story that existed only in pieces, requiring thousands of dedicated fans working together to assemble the truth. YouTube channels like The Game Theorists gained millions of views per video by attempting to crack the code. Reddit communities formed dedicated investigation teams. Discord servers became war rooms where every minigame frame, every hidden texture, every seemingly random number was scrutinized for meaning. And through this collaborative effort, certain theories emerged that didn't just explain one game. They recontextualized the entire franchise, forcing everyone to reconsider everything they thought they understood. The theories we'll explore tonight represent pivotal moments in FNAF's evolution, turning points where the community's understanding shifted dramatically. Some revealed hidden connections between games we thought were separate. Others exposed false assumptions that had led theorists astray for years. A few forced Scott himself to intervene, subtly confirming or denying directions the community had taken. Each one, in its own way, changed how we approach FNAF's mysteries, teaching us to look deeper, question harder, and never assume the obvious answer was correct. These weren't theories that simply filled in blanks. They redrew the entire map. Tonight's journey will take us through debates that consumed the community for years, revelations that arrived in unexpected ways, and paradigm shifts that forced complete re-evaluation of the franchise's foundation. We'll explore how discovering the difference between two similarly named incidents revealed a hidden timeline. We'll uncover how a seemingly random security guard became the key to connecting an entire family's tragic story. We'll examine why one of the most popular theories in FNAF history had to be dismantled for the narrative to progress. We'll reveal the identity of the franchise's most vengeful spirit and understand why her rage runs deeper than any other. And we'll discover how realizing the games weren't in chronological order unlocked the master key to understanding everything. that whether you're a veteran theorist who lived through these debates as they happened, someone catching up on years of accumulated lore, or simply letting these stories wash over you as you drift towards sleep, this comprehensive exploration will illuminate how Five Nights at Freddy's became more than a game series. It became a collaborative narrative experience where fans weren't just consumers, but active participants in revealing the truth. So settle in as we explore the 5 theories that changed everything in the twisted, tragic, and endlessly fascinating world of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of deep, immersive storytelling that unfolds like a detective novel. And let me know in the comments which of these theories you remember experiencing firsthand, and whether you were on the right side or wrong side of these debates. Now, let's begin with a revelation that started everything. The moment we realized there wasn't just one bite, but 2. Theory number 1, the 2 bites, discovering the bite of 83. When Five Nights at Freddy's first released in August 2014, one piece of lore captivated the community more than any other. Phone Guy's ominous mention of something called the Bite of 87. In his very first call, delivered in that distinctively casual yet unsettling tone, he explained how the animatronics used to be allowed to walk around during the day, interacting with guests, until the Bite of 87, when someone allegedly lost their frontal lobe in an incident involving one of these mechanical performers. He clarified with dark humor that it was amazing the victim survived without that crucial piece of their brain, though Phone Guy admitted he'd never actually seen anyone live through such trauma. This single reference spawned the franchise's first major mystery. Which animatronic was responsible? Who was the victim? And what exactly happened that day in 1987? The community immediately began investigating. The first game gave few concrete answers, but theorists analyzed every detail with forensic precision. Foxy became an early suspect due to his out-of-order status and aggressive behavior, leading many to believe Pirate Cove had been the site of the incident. Others pointed to Freddy himself, given his position as the restaurant's mascot and his central role in the gameplay. Golden Freddy's mysterious nature made him a candidate, especially given his ability to instantly crash the game, suggesting extraordinary malevolence. Some even proposed it was a combined effort, multiple animatronics working together in a catastrophic failure of programming. The debate raged across forums, YouTube videos, and Reddit threads, with passionate arguments supporting various culprits. When Five Nights at Freddy's 2 released in November 2014, just 3 months after the original, the community believed it would provide definitive answers. After all, the game was set in 1987, the exact year of the infamous bite. Surely Scott would reveal the truth here. The game introduced a new cast of toy animatronics alongside withered versions of the originals, and players immediately began scrutinizing behaviors for clues. Mangle, the grotesquely dismantled version of Foxy, became the prime suspect due to her ceiling-based attacks and the way she could hang from above, perfectly positioned to strike at someone's head. The fact that she was essentially torn apart by children during the day, creating her mangled form, suggested a tragic incident waiting to happen. Others pointed to Toy Chica's occasional lack of beak, or Toy Bonnie's aggressive nature, or even the puppet's unsettling omnipresence. Phone Guy's calls in FNAF 2 added crucial context. He mentioned the animatronics' facial recognition systems malfunctioning, causing them to see adults as endoskeletons without their costumes. Explaining their hostility, he referenced the bite only indirectly, mentioning that characters were no longer allowed to walk around during the day after certain events. On night 6, he delivered his final message with palpable anxiety, describing how someone had used a spare yellow suit from the back, causing further complications. Then, on night 7, playing as Jeremy Fitzgerald doing the day shift, the community assumed they were about to witness or experience the bite of 87 firsthand. The implication seemed clear. Jeremy was the victim, bitten while working day shift on his 7th day, explaining why Phone Guy had never seen anyone survive such an incident since it happened during daytime hours when he wouldn't have been present. This interpretation gained substantial support within the community. For years, many theorists operated under the assumption that Jeremy Fitzgerald was likely the Bite of 87 victim, attacked while working day shift, with Mangle being the most probable culprit given her positioning and aggressive behavior, though the exact victim and animatronic responsible remain subjects of ongoing debate. The withered animatronics, already damaged and hostile, remained suspects, and Mangle's prominence combined with the timing of Jeremy's day shift created what many considered a plausible explanation. Videos discussing this possibility garnered millions of views. Many wikis listed it as a leading theory. While debate continued in some circles, this interpretation gained enough traction that many theorists felt comfortable shifting focus to other mysteries like the identity of Purple Guy or the fate of the missing children. Then, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 released in July 2015, and everything changed. The game's trailer and teasers featured prominent displays of the year 87, plastered across images and hidden in various promotional materials. Scott seemed to be emphasizing this date, leading the community to believe FNAF 4 would finally, definitively, show the Bite of 87 from beginning to end. The game's setup supported this assumption. Players controlled a child terrorized by nightmarish versions of the animatronics, experiencing what appeared to be trauma-induced nightmares. The minigames between nights showed this child's daily life, revealing his fear of the animatronics at what appeared to be Fredbear's family diner, an earlier establishment predating the Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations. The minigames built toward inevitable tragedy. The child, whom the community would later call the Crying Child, was tormented by his older brother wearing a Foxy mask, assisted by friends wearing masks of Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica. The bullying escalated each night, showing the child's increasing terror of the animatronics, particularly Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, who performed on stage. Phone Guy's training tapes, heard distorted in the background of FNAF 4's nights, seemed to reference the springlock suits used in this era, foreshadowing disaster. The child carried a Fredbear plush everywhere, which spoke to him in ominous tones, promising, "I will put you back together," in ways that suggested either comfort or threat. On Night 5's minigame, the horrifying climax arrived. It was the Crying Child's birthday, celebrated at Fredbear's family diner, despite his obvious terror. The older brother and his friends, in a cruel prank gone catastrophically wrong, grabbed the Crying Child and carried him toward the stage. Despite his screams and struggles, they lifted him up to Fredbear's mouth, chanting for the animatronic to give him a big kiss. Then, in a moment of mechanical horror, Fredbear's spring-locked jaw clamped down with brutal force, crushing the child's head in full view of the birthday crowd. The sprite showed blood, the screen flashed, and the child's fate was sealed. The following minigame showed the child in a hospital bed, surrounded by his plush toys, including the talking Fredbear plush. Apologies echoed, presumably from the guilty brother. A flatline sound effect played in the background, indicating the child had died from his injuries. The date displayed on the Fredbear and Friends television show, clearly visible in earlier minigames, showed 1983. And here, the community faced a devastating realization. This wasn't the bite of 87. This was something else entirely, an earlier incident that would come to be known as the bite of 83. The revelation sent shockwaves through the theory community. For a year, theorists had believed they understood the bite of 87, that it involved Jeremy Fitzgerald and Mangle in 1987. But FNAF 4 showed an entirely different incident, one involving a child rather than an adult security guard, Fredbear rather than the FNAF2 animatronics, and occurring 4 years earlier than expected. The implications were staggering. If this was the bite of 83, then the bite of 87 remained unsolved. The incident Phone Guy referenced in the first game was a completely separate event, still shrouded in mystery, and everything theorists thought they'd established about Jeremy's fate and Mangle's culpability was suddenly uncertain. Evidence supporting this two-bite theory quickly accumulated. The 1983 date on the TV screen was indisputable, appearing clearly in the minigames. Phone Guy specifically mentioned in FNAF1 that the bite of 87 victim survived, at least initially, saying, "It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe." But the crying child clearly died in the hospital, his flatline indicating death, his fate never showing any survival or recovery. The injuries differed too. Phone Guy described a frontal lobe removal, a specific brain injury, while the crying child's head was completely crushed, a far more severe and instantly fatal trauma. The locations didn't match either. The bite of 87 happened at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza with animatronics that could walk around during the day, while the bite of 83 occurred at Fredbear's Family Diner with springlock suits that functioned differently. Scott Cawthon himself provided subtle confirmation. When MatPat of Game Theory created a video attempting to explain FNAF 4 as showing the bite of 87, using medical knowledge about frontal lobe function to support this interpretation, Scott commented that MatPat had missed one crucial detail. The community understood Scott was pointing toward the distinction between the two bites, indicating that conflating them was the error. The bite of 83 represented the crying child's death, a family tragedy that many theorists believe drove William Afton's descent into madness and murder, though the exact causality remains a subject of interpretation. The bite of 87 remained connected to FNAF2, Jeremy's day shift, and the eventual restriction of animatronic movement during daytime hours. Understanding this distinction revolutionized how theorists approached the timeline. Previously, the community had attempted to place all events relative to a single bite incident, using it as an anchor point for chronology. Realizing there were two separate bites, 4 years apart, suddenly allowed the timeline to expand and breathe. The bite of 83 became the franchise's original tragedy, the incident that broke the Afton family and set William on his murderous path according to popular interpretation. Charlie's death, Henry Emily's daughter killed by William, could now be placed within this era based on various timeline clues, though the exact sequence and William's precise motivations remain subjects of debate. The missing children's incident, commonly placed around the mid-1980s, based on evidence from sources like Into the Pit, where William murdered 5 children and stuffed them into animatronic suits, appears to flow from this progression of tragedies. The bite of 87 took on new significance as a later incident, one that occurred after years of hauntings, possessions, and covered-up tragedies. This wasn't the beginning of Freddy Fazbear's problems, but rather a consequence of the company continuing operations despite everything that had gone wrong. The victim, whether Jeremy or another day shift worker, lost their frontal lobe to an animatronic that was already possessed, already hostile, already hunting, and the incident finally forced management to restrict animatronic movement, a policy that should have been implemented years earlier after the missing children's disappearances. It represented Fazbear Entertainment's failure to learn from tragedy, their corporate greed overriding safety concerns until the inevitable happened once again. The 2-byte revelation also clarified character motivations throughout the series. William Afton's obsession with putting his son back together, referenced in his promise to the crying child, explained his later experiments with remnant and possession. He believed he could somehow restore his son, perhaps by placing his essence into an animatronic, driving his creation of the Funtime animatronics and his research into how spirits attach to machinery. Michael Afton, and the older brother responsible for his sibling's death, carried lifelong guilt that explained his later actions throughout the franchise. His willingness to work dangerous night shifts, investigate his father's facilities, and ultimately sacrifice himself in Pizzeria Simulator's fire all stemmed from this original sin, the prank that killed his brother and destroyed his family. Golden Freddy's nature became clearer through this lens as well. The community had long debated why Golden Freddy seemed different from other animatronics, why he appeared as a slumped, ghostly figure rather than an active threat. Understanding the Bite of 83 revealed that Fredbear, the suit that killed the crying child, became Golden Freddy through possession. The child's spirit, traumatized by the springlock failure that crushed his skull, had inhabited this suit in a unique way. Some theorists proposed the crying child became Golden Freddy himself, while others argued his spirit simply influenced the suit alongside Cassidy, the 5th missing child. Either interpretation was supported by the knowledge that the Bite of 83 left Fredbear scarred, both literally and spiritually. The revelation forced the community to re-evaluate every piece of evidence with fresh perspective. Suddenly, references to 87 in subsequent games weren't necessarily confirming the Bite of 87 as the franchise's sole trauma, but rather acknowledging its place as one of multiple incidents. The establishment's history became richer and more complex, spanning from Fredbear's family diner in 1983 through multiple Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations across the years, with tragedies accumulating rather than stemming from a single event. This layered approach to horror made the franchise more realistic, more grounded in how institutions actually fail, not through one catastrophic incident, but through repeated negligence and covered-up disasters. Moreover, distinguishing between the 2 bites taught the community crucial lessons about how Scott constructed his narrative. He deliberately placed red herrings and misdirection, using the number 87 in FNAF 4's promotional material to make theorists assume they were seeing that specific bite, then revealing the date 1983 in the actual game to subvert expectations. This technique, leading players down seemingly obvious paths before revealing hidden truths, became Scott's signature approach. Theorists learned to question their assumptions, to verify dates and details rather than jumping to conclusions based on surface-level evidence. The debate over which animatronic caused which bite also revealed Scott's nuanced approach to culpability. Fredbear didn't maliciously attack the crying child. The springlock mechanism failed due to tears and moisture, exactly as Phone Guy's training tapes warned. This was mechanical failure combined with human cruelty, the brothers' bullying creating the circumstances for tragedy. Similarly, whatever animatronic caused the bite of 87 wasn't acting out of pure malice, but responding to programming failures, possession-induced confusion, or misidentification of threats. Scott rarely portrayed his animatronics as simple monsters. They were victims themselves, children's spirits trapped in mechanical bodies, are acting out trauma and confusion rather than calculated evil. Understanding the bite of 83 also recontextualized FNAF4's gameplay. The nightmarish animatronics that hunted the child weren't real in the traditional sense, but manifestations of trauma. Either the child's fear-induced hallucinations as he lay dying, or his brother's guilt-driven nightmares afterward. The gameplay's intensity, the way Nightmare Fredbear and Nightmare dominated the later nights, reflected the psychological horror of the incident's aftermath. Whether the player controlled the dying child or the traumatized brother became a subject of ongoing debate, but both interpretations worked within the framework of two separate bites, affecting different people in different eras, shed the community's journey from assuming one bite to accepting two, demonstrated the collaborative, iterative nature of FNAF theorizing. Initial evidence from FNAF 1 and 2 suggested a single incident, so theorists built frameworks around that assumption. When FNAF 4 contradicted it with new evidence, rather than dismissing the new information or clinging to old theories, the community adapted, incorporating both bites into an expanded timeline. This flexibility, this willingness to revise understanding when presented with new evidence, became essential for solving FNAF's mysteries. Scott rewarded theorists who remained open-minded and punished those who became too attached to early conclusions. The distinction between the bite of 83 and bite of 87 also established important narrative themes that would recur throughout the franchise, and both incidents involved animatronics attacking humans, but the context differed dramatically. The 83 bite was family tragedy, brother accidentally killing brother in a prank gone wrong, with the animatronic serving as instrument rather than agent. The 87 bite was workplace disaster, possessed machinery attacking an employee, representing the dangers of Fazbear Entertainment's negligence. Both reflected different facets of the franchise's horror: the personal trauma of family destruction and the institutional horror of corporate malfeasance. The revelation also highlighted the franchise's preoccupation with cycles and repetition. History didn't repeat exactly in FNAF, but it echoed patterns of violence and tragedy playing out across years with slight variations. The two bites bookended an era, are marking the beginning and eventual end of animatronic freedom of movement. Between these incidents, the missing children's murders occurred, possessions began, and cover-ups accumulated. Understanding this chronology revealed how Fazbear Entertainment's problems weren't isolated incidents, but interconnected failures, each tragedy enabling the next through institutional dysfunction and moral bankruptcy. Years later, with numerous additional games released, the two-bite theory remains foundational to understanding of FNAF's chronology. New games haven't contradicted this framework but rather built upon it, adding layers of complexity without invalidating the basic distinction. The community's ability to identify and accept this revelation, despite initial resistance and confusion, and demonstrated the collective intelligence and dedication of FNAF theorists. This wasn't professional researchers or trained investigators solving mysteries. It was passionate fans, many of them teenagers and young adults, collaborating across the internet to piece together deliberately obscured narrative fragments. The Bite of 83 and Bite of 87 theory fundamentally changed how we understood Five Nights at Freddy's timeline, character motivations, and narrative structure. It transformed the franchise from a story about a single tragedy and its haunted aftermath into a chronicle of accumulated horrors spanning years, with different families and victims caught in Fazbear Entertainment's endless cycle of negligence. It taught the community to question obvious assumptions, to verify evidence carefully, and to remain flexible when new information emerged. Most importantly, it demonstrated that Scott Cawthon had crafted something far more intricate than initial appearances suggested, a narrative puzzle where solving one mystery only revealed how many others remained hidden beneath the surface. This theory opened the floodgates for deeper investigation into every aspect of the franchise. If Scott could hide an entire separate Bite incident, what else had theorists missed? What other assumptions needed re-examination? The answer, as we'll discover with our next theory, involved nothing less than the protagonist's true identity. Theory number 2. Mike Schmidt is Michael Afton, the protagonist's hidden identity. When players first loaded Five Nights at Freddy's in August 2014, they assumed the role of a night security guard named Mike Schmidt, and working 5 increasingly terrifying shifts at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The game provided minimal backstory. Mike needed money, applied for the job, and found himself trapped in an office fending off possessed animatronics until 6 a.m. each night. His paycheck, shown at the end of Night 5, revealed embarrassingly low wages, $120 for a week of life-threatening work, and mentioned he'd been terminated for tampering with the animatronics and odor. This seemed straightforward enough. Mike Schmidt was just another desperate minimum wage worker, hired by a shadowy company willing to sacrifice employees to avoid addressing their haunted animatronic problem. As the franchise expanded through FNAF 2, 3, and 4, Mike Schmidt faded from focus. Other security guards took center stage. Jeremy Fitzgerald in FNAF 2, and an unnamed guard in FNAF 3 and FNAF 4 featured a child protagonist rather than an adult security worker. Mike seemed to be just the first game's protagonist. His story concluded with that measly paycheck and termination notice. The community focused on bigger mysteries: the identity of Purple Guy, the fate of the missing children, the significance of Golden Freddy, and the timeline's proper chronology. Mike Schmidt became a footnote, the everyman protagonist whose ordinariness served the first game's straightforward survival horror approach. Then Sister Location released in October 2016, and everything changed. The game introduced players to a technician working at Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, an underground facility housing the Funtime animatronics. Unlike previous games, this protagonist had a voice, and speaking in cutscenes with a distinctive tone that conveyed weariness and determination. More importantly, he had a name: Michael. Throughout the game, the hand unit computer system addressed him as Eggs Benedict, a placeholder name it assigned after registration malfunctions, but the character knew his real identity. And in the game's final cutscene, after surviving the horror of having his internal organs scooped out and replaced with Enard's tangled mass of animatronic components, after being used as a human skin suit for an escaped amalgamation of haunted machinery, after dying and somehow reviving as an undead purple corpse, he delivered a monologue that recontextualized the entire franchise. "Father," Michael said, his voice heavy with history and determination. "It's me, Michael." He spoke of how he'd found it, referencing Circus Baby and his sister Elizabeth trapped within. He mentioned being mistaken for someone else, explaining why the Funtime animatronics had attacked him. They thought he was his father. Then came the revelation that shook the community. "I'm going to come find you." The implication was crystal clear. Michael wasn't just any protagonist. He was Michael Afton, son of William Afton, the purple-suited killer who'd murdered children and created most of the franchise's horror. Michael was working security jobs and investigating these establishments not out of financial desperation, but on a personal mission to track down his father and stop the cycle of tragedy. But Sister Location didn't explicitly connect Michael Afton to Mike Schmidt. For all the community knew, so these were two separate characters, Mike Schmidt being the FNAF1 guard, and Michael Afton being Sister Location's protagonist. The games had featured multiple guards across different time periods. Why assume they were the same person? This question sparked immediate debate. Some theorists insisted they must be connected, pointing to the name similarity, Mike being a common nickname for Michael. Others remained skeptical, arguing Scott wouldn't rely on such a subtle connection without more concrete evidence. The community needed proof, and that proof arrived through one of the franchise's most cryptic and crucial pieces of merchandise. In December 2017, the Survival Logbook released, ostensibly a security guard handbook filled with activity pages, security tips, and space for employees to document their shifts. But embedded throughout this seemingly innocent merchandise were hidden messages, invisible ink revelations, and coded communications between spirits. Most crucially, the logbook was filled with doodles, notes, and responses that appeared to be from Mike Schmidt himself. One page asked, "What is your name?" And under blacklight, the answer appeared, "Mike." But elsewhere, the name Michael appeared in different contexts. The logbook referenced FNAF 1's location, FNAF 3's Fazbear's Fright, and FNAF 4's nightmare imagery, suggesting its author had experienced all these events. The most damning evidence came from the logbook's drawings. Throughout its pages, someone had sketched various images, including Nightmare Fredbear, the terrifying antagonist from FNAF 4. And this was particularly significant because FNAF 4's nights depicted either the crying child's dying hallucinations or, more likely given the context, his older brother's guilt-induced nightmares after causing the bite of 83. If Mike Schmidt was drawing Nightmare Fredbear, experiencing these specific nightmares, then Mike Schmidt must be the older brother from FNAF 4, the teenager in the Foxy mask whose cruel prank killed his younger sibling. And that brother, as we knew from Sister Location, was Michael Afton. The connections multiplied as theorists dug deeper. The logbook referenced that party trick, involving Foxy, which could be interpreted as alluding to Michael's use of the Foxy mask to terrorize his brother. It mentioned recent dreams on a page where the Nightmare Fredbear drawing appeared, and suggesting these nightmares weren't ancient history, but ongoing trauma. The casual tone of some entries matched Michael's voice from Sister Location, that same weary determination. Most compellingly, the logbook's very premise, a security guard working multiple locations across years, aligned with Michael's mission to track down his father and contain the animatronic horrors. While Scott never explicitly confirmed this connection with a direct statement, the accumulated evidence strongly pointed toward Mike Schmidt, being an alias used by Michael Afton. Accepting Mike Schmidt as Michael Afton, a theory widely embraced by the community based on substantial circumstantial evidence, revolutionized understanding of the FNAF, one protagonist's motivations and the broader narrative structure. And this interpretation suggests Mike wasn't desperately seeking any job. He was deliberately placing himself at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, investigating his father's crimes and the possessed animatronics they'd created. His tampering with the animatronics wouldn't be vandalism or curiosity under this reading, but rather attempts to understand how the possessions worked, how to communicate with the trapped children's spirits, or how to disable the machines. His presence at these locations wouldn't be coincidence but calculated investigation, each night shift part of a larger mission to track down William Afton. This revelation also explained Michael's presence in FNAF 3. The unnamed security guard working at Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction built from salvaged Freddy Fazbear's Pizza materials, had always seemed suspiciously convenient. Understanding it was likely Michael explained everything, at least within this interpretive framework. When Fazbear's Fright's owners found Springtrap, the animatronic containing William Afton's remains, Michael would have been there to confront his father. The attraction's fire at the end of FNAF 3, while officially attributed to faulty wiring, has led some theorists to speculate it might have been Michael's deliberate attempt to destroy Springtrap and end his father's undead existence. The phantoms haunting him wouldn't be random hallucinations, but could represent the spirits of his father's victims, perhaps recognizing Michael or conflating him with William. The theory also recontextualized Michael's motivations throughout the series. His willingness to accept dangerous, low-paying security jobs made sense when understood as mission work rather than employment. His repeated returns to Fazbear establishments, despite multiple near-death experiences, reflected obsessive determination rather than foolishness. His ability to survive seemingly impossible odds, fighting off possessed animatronics night after night, suggested either supernatural resilience from his undead state, or simply the desperate determination of someone atoning for past sins and hunting a murderous father. Understanding Michael as the consistent protagonist across multiple games also unified the franchise's narrative in ways that seemed impossible when viewing each game's guard as a separate character. Under this interpretation, we weren't following random employees having isolated experiences. We were tracking one person's multi-year investigation, watching his journey from guilt-ridden teenager to determined hunter to undead avenger. His arc, as understood through this lens, provided emotional continuity across games that had seemed disconnected. The franchise wasn't about institutional horror inflicted on interchangeable victims. It became a story about one family's tragedy playing out across decades, with Michael caught between his murdering father and the spirits demanding vengeance. The theory also explained several mysteries from FNAF 1 that had seemed like mere flavor text. Mike's termination for odor could take on new significance if he was already undead, his body rotting beneath a facade of borrowed flesh. Though this remains an interpretation rather than explicit confirmation that the animatronic's particular hostility toward him would make sense if they recognized his resemblance to William Afton, attacking him out of misidentification or seeking revenge on Afton family members in general. The puppet's cryptic appearances and behavior could represent Charlotte Emily attempting to communicate with Michael specifically, either helping or hindering his investigation based on her own complex motivations. Moreover, the revelation highlighted the franchise's themes of guilt, redemption, and familial responsibility. Michael wasn't just investigating his father out of righteousness or moral duty. He was trying to undo damage he'd personally caused. His role in his brother's death initiated his father's descent into madness and murder. If Michael hadn't pushed that cruel prank too far, if the bite of 83 hadn't occurred, and perhaps William would never have become the purple-suited killer, perhaps none of the missing children would have died. Perhaps the entire tragic chain of events could have been prevented. Michael carried that weight, understanding that while he wasn't directly responsible for his father's murders, his actions had been the catalyst, the first domino whose fall sent everything else tumbling. This interpretation of Michael's character also added psychological depth to the gameplay experience. When players cursed the difficulty of FNAF nights, barely surviving until 6 a.m., they weren't just experiencing game challenge, but embodying Michael's grueling penance. Each night shift was punishment and investigation simultaneously, physical danger and psychological torture. The animatronics hunting him might have been possessed children seeking revenge on anyone connected to their killer, but they were also manifestations of Michael's guilt, his own nightmares made tangible. Every close call with Freddy, every sprint from Foxy, every frantic door slam represented Michael confronting the consequences of his family's actions. The Mike is Michael theory also explained the series' timeline in ways that had previously seemed contradictory. How could FNAF1, ostensibly set in the early 1990s, connect to FNAF3's future horror attraction, sister location's underground rental facility, and eventually Pizzeria Simulator's trap? Because Michael provided the through line, working each location in sequence as part of his investigation. His journey traced the franchise's timeline, moving from establishment to establishment, following leads on his father's whereabouts and the spread of haunted animatronics. Each game represented another chapter in his hunt, another location searched, another confrontation with his family's legacy. Critics of the theory pointed to several supposed contradictions. Mike Schmidt's FNAF 1 paycheck showed his surname as Schmidt, not Afton, suggesting they were different people. But theorists countered that Michael would likely use a fake surname when applying for jobs at establishments connected to his infamous father. Using Afton would immediately raise red flags, prevent his hiring, or alert his father to his investigation. Schmidt could be his mother's maiden name, a friend's surname, or simply a common name chosen for its inconspicuousness, and the paycheck also listed his social security number, but that could be falsified as easily as a name. Others questioned why Scott would hide such a crucial connection behind subtle hints, rather than explicit revelation. But this objection fundamentally misunderstood Scott's narrative approach. The entire franchise operated on hidden clues, coded messages, and gradual revelation. Making the Mike-Michael connection obvious would have violated the series' core identity as a puzzle requiring community collaboration to solve. Scott expected dedicated fans to piece together evidence across games and supplementary materials. The survival logbook's existence as a physical merchandise item containing crucial lore perfectly demonstrated this philosophy. Important narrative information wasn't confined to the games themselves, but spread across multiple media, rewarding fans who engaged deeply with the franchise. The theory's acceptance marked a crucial turning point in how the community approached FNAF's story. Rather than treating each game as an isolated incident, theorists began viewing the franchise as a cohesive narrative following specific characters across time. This shift in perspective unlocked numerous other mysteries. If Michael was the consistent protagonist, then his sister Elizabeth's fate in Circus Baby became personally significant, rather than just another tragedy. His father William's actions weren't distant villainy, but immediate family betrayal. The ultimate confrontation in Pizzeria Simulator, where Michael, William, Elizabeth, us and the other spirits all converged in a burning building, became a family reunion in hell, all parties meeting for final judgment. The theory also validated the community's collaborative investigative approach. No single theorist discovered the Mike-Michael connection alone. It required players comparing notes across Reddit, YouTube, Discord, and various wiki sites. Someone noticed the survival logbook drawings. Someone else connected them to FNAF4's nightmares. Another person remembered Michael's sister location monologue, and collectively they assembled the complete picture. This collaborative detective work, thousands of people contributing small observations that accumulated into major revelations, represented the FNAF community's greatest strength and Scott's genius in designing mysteries that rewarded such teamwork. Years after the theory's general acceptance, subsequent games continued supporting this interpretation without explicitly confirming it. Pizzeria Simulator showed Michael following a suspicious job listing, eventually revealed to be Henry Emily's trap to lure all remaining animatronics and souls to their destruction. Michael's willingness to walk into this obvious trap made sense only if he'd been hunting these machines for years, finally seeing an opportunity to end everything. His presence in the burning building, choosing to stay rather than escape, represented the culmination of his guilt-driven mission. He couldn't undo his brother's death or prevent his father's murders, but he could ensure it all ended, even if that meant his own destruction. The theory also enriched the franchise's emotional landscape, and knowing Michael was the protagonist made every game's scares more personal. These weren't just survival horror experiences. They were a son confronting his father's legacy, a brother atoning for his younger sibling's death, an undead wanderer seeking redemption through mission completion. When Michael barely survived FNAF 1's Night 5, when he narrowly escaped Springtrap in FNAF 3, when he faced Elizabeth in Circus Baby's suit, these weren't random encounters, but family members colliding across tragedy's aftermath. Every close call with animatronics carried weight beyond gameplay challenge. They were reminders of how Michael's family had shattered and his desperate attempts to gather the pieces. Understanding Mike Schmidt as Michael Afton, a theory strongly supported by accumulated evidence from the survival logbook and sister location, untransformed Five Nights at Freddy's from a series of disconnected horror scenarios into a cohesive tragic epic following one character's journey from guilt to redemption. It demonstrated how Scott had crafted a narrative more intricate than surface appearances suggested, hiding the protagonist's true identity behind altered names and chronological complexity. It proved the community's investigative skills, showing their ability to connect subtle clues across multiple games and supplementary materials. Most importantly, it revealed that every night shift, every survival, every close call with mechanical horror wasn't just gameplay, but Michael's penance, working night after night to understand and stop his father's legacy of murder. And the security guard's hat wasn't worn by a stranger, but by a son who knew exactly what horrors lurked in those restaurants because his family had created them. Theory number 3, the dream theory, how it almost derailed everything. In the months following Five Nights at Freddy's 4's release in July 2015, one theory dominated discussion across the community with almost cult-like fervor. The idea that everything we'd experienced in FNAF 1, 2, and 3 wasn't real. According to this interpretation, dubbed the Dream Theory, all 3 previous games existed only as nightmares in the mind of the crying child, the young boy who died after the bite of 83. Proponents argued that the child, lying in a coma after Fredbear crushed his skull, imagined the elaborate scenarios of haunted pizzerias, murderous animatronics, and terrified security guards. At every jump scare, every close call, every detail across 3 games of accumulated lore was dismissed as the dying hallucinations of a traumatized child. Nothing was real except FNAF4's minigames. Everything else, all the mysterious lore the community had spent nearly a year piecing together, was just a dream. The theory gained traction because FNAF 4 provided several pieces of seemingly compelling evidence. Most notably, the sound that played at the end of each night had changed. FNAF 1, 2, and 3 all featured a distinctive grandfather clock, chiming at 6 a.m., marking the end of each shift with an elegant, almost Victorian timepiece sound. But FNAF 4 replaced this with a digital alarm clock beeping, a jarring modern noise that stood in stark contrast to the previous game's atmospheric bell toll. To Dream Theory proponents, this shift was deliberate and significant. The grandfather clock, they argued, had been the crying child's hospital room clock, the sound he heard as he drifted in and out of consciousness. When he finally died or fully lost consciousness, the clock became digital, matching hospital equipment, indicating a change in his state and thus altering his dreams. Additionally, FNAF 4's minigames showed the crying child's home, filled with toys and plushies of the FNAF 1 animatronics, including Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. More intriguingly, a small girl's bedroom contained what appeared to be Mangle or a Fun-Time Foxy toy, suggesting that even FNAF 2's complicated roster existed in the child's awareness before the bite occurred. Dream Theory supporters claimed this proved the child had imagined all subsequent games based on his limited real-world experiences, familiar characters like these toys, overheard adult conversations about workplace incidents, and his overwhelming fear of animatronics in general. His dying brain, they argued, constructed elaborate scenarios around these familiar elements. The Fredbear plush that spoke throughout FNAF 4 added another layer. This mysterious toy offered ominous warnings and promised to put you back together, acting as either comfort or threat depending on interpretation. Some theorists believed this represented the child's subconscious, his fractured psyche trying to cope with trauma by creating an imaginary friend. Others thought it might be William Afton monitoring his son through hidden cameras and speakers, a creepy but plausible explanation given Afton's later experiments. Either way, the plush's presence and cryptic nature suggested reality in FNAF 4 was already unstable, already mixing the real with the imagined. The Dream Theory exploded in popularity, gaining substantial traction within theory communities and appearing in numerous YouTube discussions analyzing FNAF 4's meaning. His millions of subscribers absorbed the theory, and it spread like wildfire across Reddit, forums, and other theory communities. For weeks, accepting the Dream Theory became almost mandatory in some circles. Disagreeing meant being labeled as missing the obvious truth, failing to see Scott's clear intentions. The theory seemed to explain everything. All the franchise's supernatural elements, the animatronics' impossible behaviors, the security guards' repeated survival against impossible odds. It was all dream logic, where physics didn't matter and internal consistency took a back seat to nightmare imagery. But almost immediately, critical thinkers began noticing fatal flaws in the dream theory's foundation. The most obvious problem concerned the franchise's explicit lore elements that couldn't be dismissed as dreams without destroying the entire narrative. Phone Guy's calls in FNAF 1, 2, and 3 provided concrete information about Fazbear Entertainment's history, the missing children's incident, the bite of 87, and the company's various legal troubles. These weren't vague nightmare scenarios, but specific, detailed accounts of events, complete with dates, policies, and procedures. If all this was just a dying child's dream, how could he possibly imagine such elaborate corporate history, complete with consistent internal logic? The newspaper clippings in FNAF 1 posed similar problems. They referenced specific events, the missing children's murders, their bodies never being found, the suspect's lack of conviction due to insufficient evidence, and the establishment's subsequent struggles. These articles contained information a young child, especially one who died before most of these events occurred, couldn't possibly know or imagine with such specificity. The dream theory required accepting that the crying child somehow dreamed up an entire criminal investigation, complete with legal proceedings and newspaper reportage, despite dying in 1983, before most of these events happened. Moreover, FNAF 3 presented insurmountable problems for dream theory proponents. Set 30 years after FNAF 1, the game showed Fazbear's Fright, a horror attraction built from salvaged Freddy Fazbear's pizza materials. How could a child who died in 1983 dream about events occurring in 2023 or later? How could he imagine technological developments, cultural changes, or the specific way abandoned restaurants get repurposed into attractions? The game included training tapes from the original restaurants, showing Phone Guy's procedures for springlock suit maintenance. These tapes contained technical details, safety warnings, and company policies that required adult knowledge to conceptualize. A child's dying nightmare wouldn't include detailed mechanical procedures for suit maintenance. Critically, the dream theory fundamentally misunderstood FNAF's core horror. The franchise's scariness didn't stem from supernatural impossibility, but from grounded, tragically plausible circumstances. Children really had been murdered. A company really had covered it up to protect profits. Animatronics really had been used to hide bodies. These horrors worked precisely because they felt rooted in reality, reflecting real-world corporate negligence and the darkness humans inflict on each other. Dismissing everything as a dream would eliminate this grounded horror, transforming a story about tragic murders into mere nightmare imagery with no emotional weight. The community's resistance to dream theory grew as people considered its narrative implications. If FNAF 1, 2, and 3 were all dreams, then nothing mattered. The missing children weren't real victims, just figments of imagination. William Afton's murders never happened. He was merely a nightmare figure. Phone Guy's death, the security guard's struggles, the animatronics' tortured possessions, all of it was meaningless if it existed only in dying hallucinations. The theory essentially said, none of this matters, it's all fake, which violated basic storytelling principles. Why should players care about a franchise that admitted its own events weren't real? Scott Cawthon himself began dropping hints against the dream theory, though typically through subtle means rather than direct statements. When fans asked about future plans for characters like Springtrap, he implied these events were real and had real consequences requiring logical consistency. On Reddit and Steam forums, when dream theory discussions reached fever pitch, Scott made comments that suggested skepticism toward the theory, using humor and tone to indicate he didn't view it as the correct interpretation. While he rarely shut down theories explicitly, his responses to dream theory were noticeably cooler than his usual engagement with community speculation. In subsequent games, Scott made the franchise's reality increasingly undeniable. Sister Location, released in October 2016, showed Michael Afton's very real journey through Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, complete with tangible consequences like being scooped and transformed into an undead host body for Ennard, Pizzeria Simulator, and Ultimate Custom Night in 2017 and 2018, continued building concrete lore that couldn't be hand-waved as dreams without absurd mental gymnastics. The books, particularly the Silver Eyes trilogy, are told an alternate continuity version of events, but maintain similar core elements: murder, possession, and consequences, suggesting these concepts were fundamental to FNAF rather than optional nightmare imagery. The dream theory's gradual rejection by the community demonstrated important maturation in FNAF theorizing. Early in the franchise, with only 1 or 2 games released, wild speculation was acceptable because evidence was limited. But as more games added lore, as patterns emerged, as character arcs developed, the community learned to distinguish between supported theories and wishful thinking. Dream theory represented the latter, a theory that explained everything by explaining nothing, that seemingly solved mysteries by declaring them irrelevant. Moreover, so the dream theory's popularity revealed how desperate some theorists were for simple answers. FNAF's lore was complicated, often contradictory, requiring careful analysis of subtle clues. The dream theory offered an appealing shortcut. Rather than parsing complex timelines or debating character identities, just declare it all a dream and stop worrying about consistency. This lazy approach to narrative analysis represented everything Scott had designed against. His games rewarded careful attention, pattern recognition, and collaborative investigation. Dismissing everything as a dream was admitting defeat, giving up on solving the actual mysteries in favor of narrative nihilism. The theory's rejection also highlighted the community's growing sophistication in literary analysis. They began recognizing common storytelling pitfalls, like "it was all a dream," endings that writing classes typically discourage because they invalidate reader investment. FNAF theorists weren't just gamers looking for Easter eggs anymore. They were becoming skilled narrative analysts capable of identifying weak storytelling versus strong, consistent lore building. This evolution in community skill set made subsequent mystery solving more effective and helped weed out implausible theories faster. Interestingly, FNAF 4's actual purpose became clearer once dream theory was rejected. The game wasn't saying previous entries were dreams. It was showing the origin of FNAF's tragedy through the Bite of 83 and establishing William Afton's motivation for subsequent murders. The nightmare animatronics weren't evidence that all animatronics were dreams, but rather manifestations of guilt and trauma, either the crying child's dying visions or Michael Afton's guilt-induced nightmares after causing his brother's death. The game added psychological horror to the franchise's physical horror, showing how trauma persisted beyond immediate danger. The clock sound change, once considered dream theory's strongest evidence, actually had a more mundane explanation. Scott simply wanted FNAF 4's gameplay to feel different from previous entries. The digital alarm clock fit the bedroom setting better than a grandfather clock would, created more tension with its insistent beeping, and distinguished FNAF 4's home invasion horror from the office-based survival of earlier games. Reading massive lore significance into every minor change demonstrated how theorists sometimes over-interpreted details, axing patterns where Scott intended only aesthetic choices. The toy animatronics in the FNAF 4 child's home, similarly, had simpler explanations. These could have been early merchandise from Fredbear's family diner, establishing that the restaurant already had a merchandise line before the Bite of 83. Or they could have been Scott's way of visually connecting a FNAF 4 to previous games, helping players recognize the continuity despite the massive temporal and setting changes. Not everything needed deep lore significance. Sometimes a toy was just a toy, narrative shorthand rather than puzzle piece. The Dream Theory's ultimate rejection proved crucial for the franchise's continued development. Had Scott validated it, either explicitly or through continued ambiguity, subsequent games would have struggled to establish meaningful stakes. Why should players care about security breaches events if everything might just be another layer of dreams? Why invest in character arcs if those characters weren't real? The community's collective decision to abandon Dream Theory, supported by Scott's subtle discouragement, cleared the path for more sophisticated storytelling in later entries. The theory's rise and fall also served as a cautionary tale about echo chambers in fan communities. Dream Theory's popularity stemmed partly from influential voices in the community advocating for it, creating momentum that made dissent seem unreasonable. But the healthiest theory communities maintain skepticism, even toward popular ideas, constantly testing theories against new evidence rather than defending them reflexively. The community's ability to eventually reject Dream Theory despite its widespread initial acceptance showed maturity and commitment to truth over convenience. Furthermore, the Dream Theory incident taught theorists to distinguish between clever misdirection and narrative betrayal. Scott loved misleading players, as seen with FNAF2's marketing suggesting it was a sequel when it was actually a prequel. But there's a difference between playing with chronology or hiding identities versus retroactively declaring major plot points meaningless. Good misdirection adds depth upon revelation. Dream Theory would have subtracted it, taking accumulated lore and wiping it away with, "Just kidding. None of it mattered." The community learned to recognize this distinction. The theory also highlighted different types of theorists within the community. Some approached FNAF as a puzzle to solve, analyzing evidence methodically to construct accurate timelines and character relationships. Others treated it more loosely, prioritizing interesting interpretations over accuracy, valuing creativity over consistency. Dream Theory appealed more to the latter group, who found the meta-narrative concept fascinating regardless of whether evidence supported it. But a FNAF design ultimately rewarded the former approach, and the community's gradual shift toward evidence-based theorizing over speculation reflected this reality. Looking back years later, the Dream Theory represents a crucial moment in FNAF's evolution as a narrative franchise. It showed how even bad theories could be productive, forcing the community to articulate why certain interpretations didn't work, as sharpening everyone's analytical skills through debate. It demonstrated Scott's commitment to meaningful storytelling, his willingness to subtly guide the community away from interpretations that would damage the narrative. And it proved that the FNAF community, despite occasional detours, would ultimately find its way back to the truth through collaborative investigation and willingness to abandon even popular theories when evidence demanded it. The dream theory almost derailed everything by offering an easy answer that solved nothing. Its rejection cleared the path for deeper, more satisfying engagement with FNAF's actual mysteries, including the identity of its most vengeful spirit and the master timeline that connected every game. Sometimes the most important theories are the ones we ultimately reject, and teaching us what the story isn't, so we can better understand what it is. Theory number 4. Golden Freddy and the Vengeful Spirit, Cassidy's Eternal Rage. Among all the animatronics stalking Freddy Fazbear's Pizza across the franchise, one stood apart from the beginning, mysterious, impossible, and terrifying in unique ways that defied conventional understanding. Golden Freddy appeared differently than his mechanical companions. While Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy actively roamed the pizzeria with obvious mechanical presence, Golden Freddy manifested as a slumped, motionless figure appearing without warning in the office, sitting silently in the darkness with hollow eyes before crashing the game with his jump scare. He didn't follow standard animatronic rules. He teleported rather than walked, appeared in impossible locations simultaneously, and his mere presence seemed to warp reality around him. For years, the community wondered what made Golden Freddy special, why this particular character operated so differently, and who exactly possessed this ethereal golden bear. The initial answer seemed straightforward. Golden Freddy was possessed by the fifth missing child, the final victim of William Afton's murder spree, commonly dated to the mid-1980s. FNAF 3's minigames showed 5 children in a room with Spring Bonnie, representing Afton luring them to their deaths. Later minigames depicted these 5 spirits occupying the main animatronics, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and presumably Golden Freddy. The Puppets Give Gifts Give Life minigame in FNAF 2 confirmed this, showing the puppet placing masks on 4 children, transforming them into the main 4 animatronics, with a 5th child receiving a Golden Freddy mask last. This 5th victim, killed alongside the others, found their spirit bound to the Golden Bear suit, explaining Golden Freddy's supernatural behavior as an especially powerful possession. But as the franchise expanded, Golden Freddy's unique nature demanded deeper explanation. Ultimate Custom Night, released in June 2018, brought this mystery to a head with direct confirmation that Golden Freddy wasn't just another possessed animatronic, but specifically the most vengeful of all the spirits. The game itself functioned as a nightmare prison, where William Afton, trapped in some form of purgatory after Pizzeria Simulator's fire, experienced endless torment at the hands of the animatronics he'd wronged. Throughout the game, a mysterious entity called the One You Should Not Have Killed was referenced repeatedly through hidden death screens, cryptic messages, and character dialogues. This entity, implied to be controlling or facilitating Afton's endless suffering, was keeping him in this hellish loop, refusing to let him die or escape. Golden Freddy's presence throughout Ultimate Custom Night strongly suggested his connection to this vengeful spirit. His unique mechanics, flickering into existence in the office with that characteristic slumped pose, his ability to crash the game just like in FNAF 1, and his association with cutscenes showing a child's face and hearing a young voice, all pointed to Golden Freddy being the vessel or manifestation of the One You Should Not Have Killed. This wasn't a spirit seeking justice or peace like the others. This was pure vengeance, refusing to let Afton rest even after death. Even after the other spirits had moved on, this particular soul maintained an iron grip on Afton's essence, trapping him in eternal punishment. The community intensified their search for this spirit's identity. Several clues emerged from various sources, primarily the survival logbook, which had already played a crucial role in building the case for Mike Schmidt as Michael Afton. Hidden within its pages were coded messages between two spirits, seemingly communicating across dimensions or states of existence. One spirit appeared to be the crying child from FNAF 4, answering questions about his past, his favorite toy, his birthday. The other spirit was asking these questions, trying to help the crying child remember. Through complex word searches, altered text, and invisible ink revelations, this second spirit's name emerged letter by letter across different pages: Cassidy, Cassidy. This name, once decoded from the survival logbook's hidden messages, became the community's leading answer to Golden Freddy's identity and the one you should not have killed. Additional evidence supported this identification, though like many FNAF mysteries, direct confirmation from Scott remained elusive. The gravestone ending in Pizzeria Simulator showed 6 graves for the main spirits, 5 for the missing children, and 1 for Charlotte Emily. Among the 5 children's graves, the names Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz appeared clearly, corresponding to the spirits widely believed to possess Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy respectively. The 5th grave, slightly obscured and harder to read, bore the name Cassidy, marking the final missing child, whom evidence strongly suggests possesses Golden Freddy. But Cassidy wasn't just another victim, at least according to the way the narrative presents her spirit. The circumstances of her death, the nature of her possession, and her psychological state all appear to point toward exceptional trauma and rage, though the games never explicitly detail what made her experience distinct from the others. Some theorists have proposed she might have been killed last, forced to watch her 4 friends die before experiencing her own murder, creating unique horror and helplessness. Others have suggested she could have been killed in particularly brutal fashion, or perhaps she'd been a leader among the 5 children, feeling responsible for failing to save the others. And whatever the specific circumstances, evidence throughout the series suggests something about Cassidy's death or personality created a vengeful spirit that stands apart from the other victims. Evidence for Cassidy's exceptional rage appeared throughout the games. In FNAF 1, Golden Freddy's behavior was markedly more aggressive and reality-defying than the other animatronics. While Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and the Foxy followed logical paths through the building and could be tracked via security cameras, Golden Freddy simply appeared, violating spatial logic and game mechanics. His jump scare uniquely crashed the entire game, a meta-horror that suggested his supernatural power exceeded normal boundaries. This wasn't just a ghost haunting a robot. This was a spirit so powerful it could break the 4th wall, reaching beyond the game world to affect the player's reality. FN AF2 reinforced Golden Freddy's special status. While the withered animatronics roamed predictably and the toy animatronics followed their programming, Golden Freddy appeared with similar impossibility to his FNAF1 incarnation. More notably, Golden Freddy appeared in certain minigames guiding the player toward hidden rooms or secret endings, suggesting awareness beyond what other spirits possessed. This role as a guide, particularly in the Shadow Freddy form that some theorists identified as a darker manifestation of Golden Freddy, implied Cassidy's spirit had unique knowledge or abilities, possibly understanding the bigger picture of what needed to happen to achieve freedom. FN. AF3's absence of Golden Freddy was itself telling. The game focused on Springtrap, a William Afton's undead form, hunting the security guard through Fazbear's Fright. The Phantom animatronics appeared as hallucinations, including Phantom Freddy, Phantom Chica, and others. But Golden Freddy was conspicuously absent, or was he? Some theorists noted that Shadow Freddy, who appeared in FNAF 2, could be connected to the Golden Freddy entity, possibly representing Cassidy's darker, more vengeful aspect. If so, Cassidy might have been present throughout FNAF 3, working behind the scenes to ensure Afton couldn't escape, contributing to the eventual fire that consumed the attraction. Ultimate Custom Night's revelations crystallized Cassidy's role. The game's difficulty, the way every single animatronic seemed coordinated in tormenting Afton, suggested a guiding intelligence behind the nightmare, and that intelligence was Cassidy. The voice lines from characters like Withered Chica explicitly referenced the one you shouldn't have killed, and other characters made comments suggesting they knew they were participating in punishment, rather than simply following programming. Cassidy had marshaled an entire army of spirits and remnant-infused animatronics to create the perfect prison for Afton, a nightmare from which he could never escape or wake. The child's face, that appeared during certain Ultimate Custom Night events, showed a young person with dark features, while the voice, ambiguously gender-neutral in tone, delivered lines heavy with barely contained rage. Let's see how many times you can be pulled apart and put back together. This wasn't a plea for help or a cry for justice. It was a threat, a promise of endless torment. A Cassidy had become so consumed by vengeance that even after the other spirits found peace in Pizzeria Simulator's fire, even after Charlotte, Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz moved on to their happiest day, Cassidy remained, chaining herself to Afton's essence to ensure he suffered forever. This revelation about Cassidy's nature sparked intense debate about the ethics and tragedy of her position. On one hand, her vengeance was understandable, perhaps even justified. Afton had murdered her as a child, stuffed her body into an animatronic suit, and shown no remorse for his actions. He'd killed repeatedly, destroyed multiple families, and caused untold suffering. If anyone deserved eternal punishment, surely it was William Afton. Cassidy's refusal to let him escape could be seen as righteous justice, ensuring the most prolific child killer in the franchise's world never found peace or escape. But other theorists viewed Cassidy's endless vengeance as tragic rather than triumphant. By chaining herself to Afton, refusing to let go of her rage and hatred, Cassidy denied herself the peace the other spirits achieved. While Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz got their happiest day, finally freed from their possessions and moving to whatever afterlife awaited them, Cassidy remained trapped in a cycle of punishment, forever reliving her murder through the act of torturing her murderer. She'd become defined entirely by her trauma and rage, unable to move past what Afton had done to her, sacrificing her own eternal rest to ensure his eternal suffering. This interpretation gained support from Old Man Consequences, a character appearing in Ultimate Custom Night's Easter eggs. In a hidden minigame, Old Man Consequences speaks to the player while they fish in a peaceful lake, saying, "Leave the demon to his demons. Rest your own soul. There is nothing else." This advice, seemingly directed at Cassidy, suggested that even divine or cosmic forces recognized her vengeance had gone too far, that she needed to let go and find peace rather than remaining chained to Afton. The minigame's drowning ending, where the player sinks into the lake, possibly represented Cassidy finally choosing peace, submerging her vengeful spirit and allowing both herself and Afton to face whatever judgment awaited them. Whether Cassidy eventually took Old Man Consequence's advice remained ambiguous. Some theorists believed Ultimate Custom Night represented a permanent state, a Cassidy eternally tormenting Afton in a loop that would never end. Others thought the game showed a process, Cassidy gradually working through her rage through these torture sessions until finally being able to let go, explaining why later games like Security Breach didn't reference Afton being trapped in Nightmare Purgatory. The ambiguity was likely intentional, allowing different interpretations of Cassidy's ultimate fate. The revelation of Cassidy's identity and her role as the vengeful spirit transformed understanding of Golden Freddy from a mysterious anomaly into a fully realized character with understandable motivations. Her behavior across the games made sense when viewed through the lens of exceptional trauma, creating exceptional attachment to the world of the living and exceptional determination to punish her killer. As she wasn't just haunting Golden Freddy, she was wielding it as a weapon, using its supernatural properties to exceed normal ghostly limitations, appearing anywhere, influencing events, and ultimately trapping Afton in a personalized hell. Some theorists have proposed additional complexity to Cassidy's story through the Two Souls theory, suggesting Golden Freddy might be possessed by both Cassidy and the crying child from FNAF 4. This interpretation, while debated within the community, would explain Golden Freddy's sometimes contradictory behavior, the aggressive manifestations potentially driven by Cassidy's vengeance, the more passive or helpful appearances potentially driven by the crying child's gentler nature. Evidence cited in support of this theory includes FNAF 4's connection between the crying child and Golden Freddy/Fredbear, thus the survival logbook showing both spirits communicating, and the seemingly dual nature of Golden Freddy's appearances across games. However, whether Golden Freddy houses one soul or two remains a subject of ongoing discussion. Whether Golden Freddy housed one soul or two, Cassidy's identity as the dominant, vengeful spirit became widely accepted. Her role as the one you should not have killed indicated she was special among Afton's victims, the one whose death crossed some final line, whose spirit possessed sufficient rage and power to exceed normal possessions. Perhaps she was the first victim, setting everything in motion. Perhaps she was the last, accumulating horror from watching the others die first. Perhaps her personality, determined and unbreakable even as a living child, translated into an indomitable spirit after death. Or whatever the cause, Cassidy became the franchise's embodiment of vengeance, the spirit who refused to forgive, forget, or move on. This characterization added depth to FNAF's treatment of trauma and justice. The franchise had always walked a fine line between presenting the murdered children as innocent victims deserving sympathy and acknowledging that their possessions caused real harm to innocent security guards and employees. Cassidy's extreme vengeance crystallized this tension. She had every right to her rage. Her desire for revenge was utterly justified, yet her refusal to let go trapped her in a cycle preventing healing. The franchise asked difficult questions. When does justice become vengeance? When does vengeance become self-destruction? And who decides when enough punishment is enough? The Cassidy story also highlighted how different victims process trauma differently. While most of the missing children seem confused, lashing out at adults they mistook for their killer, or simply trying to understand what happened to them, Cassidy knew exactly what she wanted: Afton's suffering. This laser focus on revenge distinguished her from the others, suggesting a personality that even death couldn't diminish. She remained herself, determined and uncompromising, even after being murdered and bound to an animatronic shell. The community's journey to identify Cassidy demonstrated once again the collaborative detective work FNAF required. No single source explicitly stated Cassidy is Golden Freddy or Cassidy is the one you should not have killed. Instead, players had to assemble this understanding from coded messages in the survival logbook, obscured gravestones in Pizzeria Simulator, behavior patterns across multiple games, and thematic clues in Ultimate Custom Night. This distributed evidence approach rewarded players who engaged deeply with every aspect of the franchise, from gameplay to merchandise to hidden secrets. The revelation also added tragic irony to William Afton's fate. He'd spent years murdering children, experimenting with Remnant, attempting to achieve immortality and understand supernatural possession. His experiments succeeded. He achieved a form of immortal existence, trapped in Springtrap's decaying shell, reviving after fires that should have killed him, persisting beyond death. But this immortality became his curse rather than achievement, because it meant Cassidy could trap him forever, ensuring his existence consisted entirely of torment. Afton got his immortality, and Cassidy ensured he'd spend every moment of it suffering. Years after Ultimate Custom Night's release, Cassidy's identity as the vengeful spirit and Golden Freddy's possessor has become one of the community's most widely accepted theories, supported by substantial evidence from multiple sources. Unlike many FNAF theories that evolved or were overturned as new games released, the Cassidy identification has remained remarkably consistent, supported by convergent evidence and never directly contradicted by subsequent releases. This stability is noteworthy in a franchise known for overturning assumptions and revealing hidden truths, and suggesting this represents one of the puzzle pieces the community has successfully assembled, even if absolute confirmation remains elusive, as with most FNAF mysteries. Cassidy's story arc, from murdered child to vengeful spirit, to the force imprisoning William Afton in eternal punishment, represented FNAF's narrative at its most emotionally complex. She was simultaneously victim and tormentor, tragic and terrible, deserving sympathy yet disturbing in her single-minded cruelty. Golden Freddy's mystery, once a simple question of which spirit possessed which animatronic, evolved into a meditation on trauma, justice, and the cost of refusing to let go of rage. Cassidy chose vengeance over peace, and whether that choice was right, wrong, or simply human remained beautifully ambiguous, allowing players to reach their own conclusions about where righteous anger ends and self-destructive obsession begins. The revelation of Cassidy's identity and role transformed Golden Freddy from mysterious anomaly into FNAF's most tragic and complex character, the spirit whose justified rage imprisoned both her murderer and herself in an endless cycle neither could escape. She changed everything we understood about possession, vengeance, and the true cost of murder in Five Nights at Freddy's. Theory number 5. The timeline theory. When chronology isn't chronological. When Five Nights at Freddy's 2 released in November 2014, just 3 months after the original game, the community naturally assumed it would be a sequel, picking up where the first game left off, or perhaps following a new protagonist in a later time period. The game's title, armed with that prominent 2, seemed to confirm sequential storytelling. The marketing, the teaser images, the anticipation all centered around discovering what happened next in the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza saga. Players loaded the game expecting to continue the narrative chronologically, moving forward from Mike Schmidt's night shifts into new horrors at a modern or future location. What they discovered instead would revolutionize not just how they understood FNAF, but how they approached video game storytelling altogether. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 wasn't a sequel at all. It was a prequel, set in 1987, several years before the events of the first game. The revelation didn't arrive immediately. Unlike modern games that display explicit dates in UI elements or opening cinematics, FNAF 2 hid its timeline placement in the details, requiring players to piece together clues from newspaper clippings, phone calls, and environmental storytelling. The first hint came from the animatronics themselves. While the game featured the withered, decayed versions of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy that players recognized from FNAF 1, it also introduced the toy animatronics, sleek, modern, child-friendly versions of the classic characters alongside new additions like Balloon Boy and the Marionette. Why would a sequel feature both degraded old models and shiny new ones? Phone Guy's presence provided the next clue. In FNAF 1, Phone Guy had died during his calls on Night 4, his recording cutting off as Golden Freddy's distinctive groan played and the sound of chaos suggested his demise. Yet here he was in FNAF 2, alive and leaving new messages, and some players initially theorized these might be pre-recorded from before FNAF 1. Perhaps he'd worked at multiple locations and left standard training messages, but his calls referenced specific contemporary events, the establishment's imminent closure, ongoing investigations, someone using a spare yellow suit from the back. These weren't generic recordings, but real-time messages responding to current crises. The smoking gun arrived with Jeremy Fitzgerald's paycheck on Night 5 and the newspaper clippings at the game's conclusion. The paycheck, while showing comically low wages matching FNAF 1's dismal compensation, bore a crucial detail in its date field. It was issued in November 1987. Meanwhile, the newspapers described the location's closure, referencing the bite that led to restrictions on animatronic movement during daytime hours. So the community, already debating whether this game showed the infamous bite of 87, realized these newspapers were describing events that happened before FNAF 1. The closure of this particular pizzeria, and the incident that led to the policies Phone Guy mentioned in the original game. FNAF 2 wasn't showing what happened after Mike Schmidt's night shifts. It was revealing what led to that location existing in the first place. The timeline realization sent shockwaves through the theory community. Everything they'd carefully constructed about FNAF's chronology, all the assumptions about narrative progression and character arcs, had to be reconsidered. If the numbered titles didn't indicate chronological order, what else had they gotten wrong? Where did other games fit in the timeline? Were there more prequels hiding in plain sight? And the discovery taught a crucial lesson. Scott Cawthon wasn't bound by conventional storytelling structures, and his mysteries required questioning even the most basic assumptions about how narratives worked. Understanding FNAF 2 as a prequel rather than sequel unlocked numerous mysteries that had seemed contradictory. Phone Guy's death in FNAF 1 no longer conflicted with his presence in FNAF 2. He'd recorded FNAF 2's calls before the events that led to his demise in the later but earlier game. The animatronics evolution made sense. The toy models in 1987 represented the company's attempt to modernize and distance themselves from the damaged, suspect originals. When this location failed and closed, The company would later reopen with the original animatronics repaired and retrofitted, explaining FNAF1's setup, and the withered animatronics in FNAF2 weren't older than FNAF1's cast. They were the same robots in worse condition, scavenged for parts to create the toys before eventually being restored. The prequel revelation also contextualized FNAF2's increased difficulty and larger cast of enemies. Players had wondered why a sequel would be harder, expecting developers usually ramp difficulty across sequels, but might ease into franchises with simpler entries. But a FNAF 2 wasn't meant to be approached after FNAF 1. It was telling an earlier, more chaotic period in Fazbear Entertainment's history. The multiple animatronic variants, the complex mechanics, the overwhelming sense of barely controlled chaos, all reflected an establishment spiraling toward inevitable disaster. By the time FNAF1 occurred, the company had learned painful lessons by reducing the animatronic roster, implementing stricter security measures, even if those measures still proved inadequate. Most significantly, understanding the timeline allowed proper placement of the missing children's incident. FNAF2's minigames showed this tragedy occurring, with the purple-suited killer luring children to their deaths. But this wasn't a new incident. It was the original murders that set everything in motion. The children's spirits possessed the animatronics, explaining their hostile behavior in both FNAF 2 and later in FNAF 1. Phone Guy's references to rumors about the establishment, the investigations, the building's lockdown, all gained context as the community realized this game showed the immediate aftermath of the murders, while FNAF1 showed the long-term consequences years later. Or when FNAF 3 released in March 2015, the timeline question intensified. The game's description explicitly stated it occurred 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed its doors, seemingly placing it around 2023 or later, decades after both previous games. This furthered the revelation that FNAF wasn't following chronological numbering. FNAF1 occurred in the middle of the timeline chronologically. FNAF2 happened first in story order, and FNAF 3 came last. The community had to maintain two separate orderings: release order showing the game's publication sequence, and story order showing when events actually occurred in the franchise's universe. FNAF4's placement proved more contentious within the community. The game's minigames clearly showed the bite of 83, placing them before both FNAF2 and 1 chronologically. But the Nightmare gameplay section sparked ongoing debate, with different interpretations suggesting these could be occurring in 1983 as the crying child lay dying, or later as Michael Afton experienced guilt-induced nightmares, or even as part of William Afton's fear experiments on test subjects. Different interpretations placed FNAF 4's gameplay at various points in the timeline, either as the franchise's first event chronologically or potentially occurring between FNAF 1 and 3, with the community divided on which reading best fit the available evidence. Sister Location, Pizzeria Simulator, and subsequent games continued this non-chronological approach. Sister Location's placement has remained particularly debated within the community, with various pieces of evidence supporting arguments for it occurring before FNAF 1, or during the gap between games, or after certain events, depending on which clues theorists prioritize and how they interpret Michael's journey. Pizzeria Simulator more clearly comes late in the timeline, serving as the climactic gathering of all lingering spirits for final judgment. The game's release order bears essentially no relationship to their story order, forcing the community to construct a chronological timeline through careful evidence analysis rather than numerical assumption. The timeline theory's revelation fundamentally changed how players approached each new FNAF release. Rather than assuming a new game would pick up where the last left off, theorists immediately began hunting for temporal placement clues, examining paychecks for dates, analyzing technology levels, comparing character ages, and looking for references to previous incidents that would establish when the new story occurred relative to established events. Every hidden newspaper, every casual mention in phone calls, every environmental detail that might hint at the game's era became crucial evidence. This approach to storytelling, where chronology was deliberately obscured and had to be reconstructed through detective work, was revolutionary in gaming. Most franchises either told stories sequentially or, when using flashbacks or time skips, clearly labeled them. Scott presented jumbled chronology with minimal signposting, trusting his community to assemble the proper order through collaboration and careful analysis. This made every game's release a massive investigative event, with thousands of theorists pooling their observations to place the new entry correctly in the overall timeline. The community developed increasingly sophisticated tools for timeline construction. Detailed charts plotted every game, minigame, and book entry along a temporal axis, with color coding for certainty levels, some events firmly dated, others approximately placed, some entirely speculative. Wikis maintained comprehensive timeline pages that evolved as new evidence emerged. YouTube creators produced elaborate animated timelines showing the franchise's story chronologically rather than in release order. These collaborative efforts represented collective investigation on an unprecedented scale. Understanding the timeline's non-chronological nature also revealed Scott's narrative ambitions, and he wasn't just telling scary stories about haunted animatronics. He was constructing a multi-decade epic spanning generations, showing how single tragic incidents rippled across years to affect numerous lives. The timeline revealed patterns, how Fazbear Entertainment repeatedly made the same mistakes, prioritizing profit over safety across different eras. It showed how trauma and vengeance persisted across time, with Michael Afton spending decades hunting his father's legacy and spirits, remaining bound to their animatronic prisons for years. The chronological approach also allowed Scott to reveal information strategically. By showing events out of order, he could hint at future happenings without spoiling them, or show consequences before causes to create mystery. Players experiencing FNAF 1 first saw possessed animatronics attacking without knowing why, creating genuine mystery. FNAF 2, as a prequel, then revealed the missing children's incident that explained the possessions, but only after players had spent months theorizing about causes. This controlled revelation of information, possible only through non-chronological storytelling, kept the community engaged and theorizing continuously. Moreover, the timeline's complexity mirrored the franchise's themes of hidden history and covered-up crimes. Fazbear Entertainment obscured their own timeline, destroying records, covering up incidents, creating gaps in publicly available information. The community's struggle to piece together chronology reflected in-universe characters' struggles to understand what really happened at these establishments. Theorists became investigators in a meta-sense, dealing with deliberately obscured evidence, just like fictional detectives trying to prosecute Fazbear Entertainment for their negligence. The timeline theory also highlighted Scott's attention to consistency, despite the intentional confusion. Once theorists established the chronological order, events snapped into place with remarkable coherence. Phone Guy's death in FNAF 1, commonly placed in the early 1990s based on various clues, happened after his FNAF 2 calls from 1987, check. The bite of 87 occurred during FNAF 2, leading to restrictions mentioned in FNAF 1, check. The missing children's incident happened before both main games, explaining possessions throughout, check. Springtrap's appearance 30 years after the pizzeria's closure, aligned with timeline evidence, check. The consistency, once uncovered, validated the community's detective work. Some timeline placements remained contentious years later, particularly sister location's position and the exact years for various incidents. But these debates themselves became part of FNAF's appeal, with different theorists constructing competing timelines that mostly aligned but differed on specific placements. The franchise accommodated multiple valid interpretations, rewarding different analytical approaches rather than demanding single correct answers for every question. The timeline revelation also taught the community valuable lessons about assuming narrative conventions. Video game sequels typically advance chronologically. Books in a series usually follow linear progression. Movies number their installments sequentially for good reason. FNAF rejected these conventions without apology, demanding players actually engage with content rather than relying on titles and numbering to convey information. This rejection of hand-holding frustrated some players, but delighted others who appreciated the intellectual challenge. Understanding the true chronology transformed how the community understood character arcs as well. Michael Afton's journey, once properly chronologically ordered, showed a clear progression from guilty teenager to his father's unwitting accomplice in sister location, to determined investigator in FNAF 1 and 3, to willing sacrifice in Pizzeria Simulator. William Afton's descent from grief-stricken father after the bite of 83, to vengeful killer during the missing children's incident, to inhuman monster in later years, to burning corpse in Springtrap, have followed a tragic yet logical path. These character progressions only made sense when viewing events in story order rather than release order. The timeline theory's revelation represented perhaps the most fundamental shift in FNAF understanding, beyond any single plot point or character identity. It changed how theorists approached every game, teaching them to question basic assumptions about storytelling structure. It demonstrated Scott's commitment to complex narrative construction, trusting his audience to handle non-linear chronology without explicit guidance. It created a community skilled in temporal puzzle solving, able to place new games correctly through evidence analysis rather than numbering conventions. Years later, with numerous games spanning from 1979's Secret of the Mimic through 2030's Era Security Breach, the timeline has expanded dramatically, but maintained the same non-chronological release pattern. New games continue appearing in various timeline positions, adding backstory here, extending forward there, filling gaps throughout. The community has adapted, immediately investigating temporal placement for every release rather than assuming sequential storytelling. This approach has become second nature to FNAF theorists, a fundamental skill required for proper franchise engagement. The timeline theory changed everything by revealing the most basic assumption about the franchise, that the numbered titles indicated chronological progression, was wrong. This discovery opened theorists' minds to questioning all assumptions, leading to revelations about character identities, hidden connections, and narrative complexity that would never have emerged if the community had continued accepting surface-level interpretations. By forcing players to reconstruct chronology through evidence, Scott created a deeper, more engaging narrative experience that rewarded investigation and collaboration. The timeline wasn't given, it had to be earned, and that earning process transformed casual players into dedicated investigators, building a community united by shared detective work. Conclusion: how theories changed everything. As we drift toward the end of this journey through Five Nights at Freddy's most transformative theories, it's worth reflecting on what makes this franchise's community so unique in gaming culture. These 5 theories, discovering the 2 bites, unmasking Mike Schmidt as Michael Afton, rejecting the dream theory, identifying Cassidy as the vengeful spirit, and reconstructing the scrambled timeline, represent more than just plot revelations. They demonstrate how a dedicated community can collaborate to solve mysteries their creator deliberately obscured, how thousands of theorists working together can reconstruct a narrative puzzle scattered across multiple games, books, and hidden messages. What made these theories transformative wasn't just that they revealed hidden truths. It's that they fundamentally altered how the community approached Five Nights at Freddy's. Before realizing there were 2 separate bites, theorists tried forcing all evidence to fit a single incident, creating contradictions they couldn't explain. Once they accepted multiple bites occurring across different years, the timeline expanded naturally, allowing events to breathe and connect logically. Before identifying Mike Schmidt as Michael Afton, each game seemed to follow random protagonists having isolated experiences. Understanding Michael as the consistent thread unified the franchise into a cohesive family tragedy. Before rejecting the dream theory, some theorists were ready to dismiss the entire narrative as meaningless hallucination. Rejecting that interpretation cleared the path for deeper engagement with actual mysteries. Before identifying Cassidy, Golden Freddy remained a generic, mysterious entity. Understanding her trauma and vengeance transformed her into the franchise's most complex character. Before reconstructing chronology, the timeline seemed contradictory and impossible to follow. Realizing Scott deliberately scrambled event order turned confusion into clarity, each revelation built upon previous ones, demonstrating how community knowledge compounds over time. The 2 bites discovery informed timeline reconstruction, which contextualized Michael's investigation, which explained his presence at various locations, which helped identify when specific games occurred, which revealed Cassidy's long pursuit of Afton across decades. These theories didn't exist in isolation, but formed an interconnected web of understanding, each piece supporting and illuminating others. This interconnection reflected Scott's narrative design, a story where everything truly did connect, where seemingly random details served larger purposes, where patience and attention rewarded theorists with genuine answers. The collaborative nature of FNAF theorizing deserves special recognition. No single person discovered any of these theories alone. The Bite of 83 revelation required some players to notice the 1983 date on the TV screen, others to compare it against the Bite of 87 references, still others to explain why 2 bites made narrative sense. Mike is Michael emerged from players comparing Sister Location's cutscene with the survival logbook's hidden messages with FNAF 1's paycheck, connecting dots spread across years of releases. Dream Theory's rejection happened because thousands of voices pushed back against its narrative nihilism, collectively articulating why the theory failed. Cassidy's identity coalesced from coded messages in the logbook, gravestones in Pizzeria Simulator, and behavior analysis across multiple games. Timeline reconstruction required comparing every date, every technological detail, every reference across the entire franchise. This collaborative investigation created something special, a fandom that functioned as a collective intelligence, capable of solving puzzles no individual could crack alone. Reddit threads, YouTube videos, Discord servers, Twitter discussions, wiki pages, all contributed pieces to an ever-evolving understanding. When one person noticed a detail, thousands others helped contextualize it. When someone proposed a theory, the community stress-tested it against all available evidence. This decentralized investigation, with no single authority determining canon, created robust conclusions that had been thoroughly vetted by diverse perspectives. Scott Cawthon's role in facilitating this community investigation deserves acknowledgement as well. He could have told his story straightforwardly, with clear exposition and linear progression. Instead, he chose to scatter clues across multiple media, hide crucial information in minigames and source code, use misdirection and red herrings, and trust his community to piece everything together. This approach showed remarkable faith in players' intelligence and dedication. It also demonstrated sophisticated understanding of interactive storytelling, recognizing that mysteries players solve themselves feel more satisfying than answers served on platters. Moreover, Scott engaged with the community in subtle ways, sometimes confirming theories through knowing silence, other times gently steering discussion away from wrong paths, through cryptic comments or telling details in new releases. His involvement never felt heavy-handed or controlling, but rather like a dungeon master guiding players through a campaign, providing hints when they're truly stuck while letting them work through challenges independently. This balanced approach maintained mystery while preventing frustration, keeping theorists engaged without feeling manipulated. The 5 theories we've explored tonight also reveal FNAF's core themes: trauma and its persistence across time, family and its capacity for both love and destruction, justice versus vengeance and the blurry line between them, institutional failure and covered-up crimes, and the lingering consequences of violence on both victims and perpetrators. These aren't light horror game themes. They're heavy, meaningful concepts that resonate because they reflect real human experiences. The theories that changed everything did so partly because they revealed this depth, showing FNAF wasn't just jump scares and creepy animatronics, but a meditation on tragedy, guilt, and the impossibility of escaping past sins. Looking forward, the franchise continues evolving with new games, new books, new revelations still emerging. The theories we've discussed remain foundational, but they're not the end of FNAF's mysteries. Security Breach introduced the Mimic, an entity whose connection to previous events remains under investigation. Help Wanted and its sequel explored digital horror and the persistence of evil through data. The movie adaptation created alternate continuity with its own mysteries. FNAF's universe keeps expanding, constantly providing new material for theorists to analyze, new connections to discover, new debates to engage. What's certain is that the community's approach, shaped by these 5 transformative theories, will guide future investigation. Theorists have learned to question obvious assumptions, as the timeline revelation taught. They've learned to look for hidden connections between seemingly unrelated elements, as the Mike Michael discovery demonstrated. They've learned to reject appealing but unsupported theories, as the Dream Theory's failure showed. They've learned to decode hidden messages and piece together fragmented information, as Cassidy's identification required. And they've learned to accept complexity rather than seeking simple answers, as the 2 bytes distinction proved necessary. The legacy of these theories extends beyond FNAF itself. Other game developers have noted the franchise's success with community-driven storytelling, inspiring similar approaches in other games. The theory-crafting culture FNAF cultivated, with its combination of careful evidence analysis and creative interpretation, has influenced how other franchises engage their communities. YouTubers who cut their teeth analyzing FNAF now apply similar investigative skills to other mysterious games. The collaborative investigation model, where fans work together to solve narrative puzzles, has become more common partly because FNAF demonstrated its viability and appeal. For newcomers experiencing FNAF for the first time in 2025 or beyond, these theories provide a roadmap to understanding the franchise's depth, rather than getting lost in contradictory information or feeling overwhelmed by 11 years of accumulated lore. New theorists can follow the path established by these 5 revelations. Start by understanding the timeline isn't chronological. Piece together the 2 separate byte incidents. Recognize Michael Afton's presence throughout. Appreciate Cassidy's tragic vengeance. And maintain skepticism toward theories that seem to explain everything too conveniently. This framework provides solid foundation for engaging with FNAF's mysteries. As we conclude this exploration, it's worth emphasizing what makes Five Nights at Freddy's special in gaming history. It wasn't just a horror game that got popular. It was a narrative experiment that succeeded wildly, and proving that audiences would engage with deliberately obscured storytelling if the mysteries were fair and the community support was strong. It showed that indie developers could create cultural phenomena without massive budgets, through clever design and respect for player intelligence. It demonstrated that the barrier between creator and community could be permeable, with Scott responding to theories and the community influencing the franchise's direction through their interpretations and engagement. These 5 theories changed everything because they represented the community mastering Scott's mystery box, proving they could decode his carefully constructed puzzles. Each revelation was a victory for collaborative investigation, evidence of thousands of minds working together toward truth. They transformed FNAF from a collection of scary games into a rich narrative universe with depth comparable to long-running book series or television shows. They showed that video games could tell complex stories requiring active audience participation to fully understand. Whether you've been part of this community since 2014, watching these theories emerge in real time and participating in the debates, or you're discovering them now years later through videos like this, these revelations represent FNAF at its finest. Mysteries that seemed impossible until suddenly they weren't. Theories that initially sparked controversy until evidence made them undeniable. Moments when everything clicked into place, and the story's true shape emerged from carefully planted clues. These are the theories that changed everything, not just revealing plot points, but transforming how we understand haunted animatronics, murdered children, and one family's tragic legacy. Before you drift away, feel free to like and subscribe if this deep dive into FNAF's most important theories resonated with you. Let me know in the comments which of these theories surprised you most, which debates you remember participating in, or which aspects of FNAF's lore you'd like explored next. The story isn't over. New games continue emerging, new theories keep forming, and the community's investigation persists. But these 5 theories, the foundations upon which everything else was built, will always represent the moments when everything changed in the twisted, tragic, and endlessly fascinating world of Five Nights at Freddy's. Until next time, May your nights be peaceful, and your animatronics stay on their stages, and your own mysteries, whatever they may be, prove solvable with patience, collaboration, and the willingness to question what seems obvious. Good night.